Most humans live in an autopilot mode. Most of us go through the day not fully appreciating the depth what a given moment offers us. Challenges are a part of human life. Challenges may come in various forms, ranging from financial issues, workplace difficulties, life threatening illnesses, and relationship turmoil. And especially operating in today's context, living through this pandemic, things have become even more difficult for majority of us. Listening to the feedback received from all our sectors, we were previously able to bring a series of sessions on mindfulness using internal and external faculties for our own employees, but none like this one today. We thought of bringing you a subject expert on this area of study to share her tips and techniques to manage stress and develop a present moment awareness commonly referred to as mindfulness. A very good evening to everyone joining with us across the John Keels Group. It's Thursday, 27th November, and welcome to the session on protecting our mind. And now to introduce our program facilitator. She is a professor in clinical psychology at the Faculty of Medicine, University of Colombo. Her career began in 1995 in human resources at the Merchant Bank of Sri Lanka. Since then, she has published extensively on psychological processes. In 2007, she co-founded the first postgraduate training program in clinical psychology in Sri Lanka, the Master of Philosophy in Clinical Psychology at the University of Colombo. She has also been a visiting academic to several Sri Lankan universities, including the University of Sri Jayawardenepura, Sabaragamuwa, and Canada. She has also been providing training and psychometric assessment services since 1997 to several key organizations in the country. In 2008, she was elected the founder president of the Sri Lanka Psychological Association. So let me now welcome on screen Professor Priyanjali D'Souza to conduct the session on protecting our mind. Professor, over to you. Professor, your mic is on mute. If you can unmute yourself.
Are okay?
Yes, can hear you.
Can. Okay, fine. So, fine. How many people do we have online? Right? Do we have a count?
As of now, we have close to 40 odd people.
Okay, great. So, I think I am supposed to talk to you on how to manage stress, stress management, because now a lot of people think that maybe not a lot of people, but some people think that saying that we are stressed shows that we are very busy and productive and even successful. That's a misnomer that we sometimes see in the corporate sector. So if you ask somebody, how are you? And they say, I'm stressed, people in a way take it as a positive aspect. Whilst people who seem to be relaxed and who stay peaceful and calm are sometimes thought to be non-productive. You see, even behaviorally, people who are rushing around like an extremely busy bee, they're having 2 or 3 mobile phones and answering this call, that call, rushing from meeting to a meeting, however productive it may or may not be, is considered productive and forward mobile, whilst people who seem to be more rested and calm are considered to be not very high achievers. But these are all myths, because we do know that stress excessively, but particularly excessively, is not useful at all. So today what I'm going to do with you is maybe talk to you for 1 hour, maybe 10 minutes about stress, what it is, how it shows on our body and on our mind, then the kinds of professions that are considered inherently stressful, and also the kinds of other life situations that can give you certain kinds of stresses, and finally how to manage stress, firstly by yourself, and if you feel that you need professional help, how to find proper professionals to go to. So that's the plan. Then for about 20 minutes we will take questions. So if you have any questions, kindly write it in the chat and we will try to address them before we end the session at 4:30 today. So let me just share my slides. So are the slides visible?
It's coming on screen now. We can see yours.
So let's see what stress is and how can you, so you can see the slides, no, Rahis or Sashi?
We can see the slides.
Okay, great. So, so let's see what stress is and how we define stress, because a definition is really useful because of all these myths about stress that we have in the world. You know, some people think that stress is this really positive state that you're really productive, while somebody thinks it's a disruptive state. So there are various kinds of miscommunication. So let's be on the same page. Basically, stress is a pattern of disruptive physical and mental reactions to events that threaten our ability to cope. So the key words I have underlined here. So you could see that stress is actually it's a disruption. You know, it kind of imbalances you. So it's disruptive. So it's a negative mental state. It's not only a mental state, it's a physical state. So when a person gets disrupted, it is shown in the person's mind and in the body. And why does somebody get stressed? It is because the person evaluates that a particular situation that has arisen in that person's life cannot be coped by him or her. That's why it says threatens to ability. So therefore, it's an event that I find stressful will not be found stressful by Sashi or Rahis, because there are individual variations as well. That's why it says threatens our own unique ability to cope. That's why we see in our own lives, in the company, in the neighborhood, amongst our relatives, that different people's ability to manage stress varies, because it is an individual's unique ability to cope with threatening situations in one's life. So that's what stress means. Usually we know that we are stressed when we have certain physiological and psychological reactions. So the physiological reactions are really common. You might get a palpitations, like beating of the heart, you might sense it. You might have like butterflies in the stomach. It's like, for example, you know, sometimes when you go in the aeroplane or in the lift, suddenly there's like a thud that goes up and your stomach feels all like queasy and like empty, like a vacuum. That kind of feelings you might get. You might be really sweating and AC might be on. It may be a rainy day, but you're still sweating. So those are kind of physiological reactions to stress. There are also a lot of psychological reactions to stress. For example, difficulty in concentration. So when we are undergoing a stressful situation, we might not be able to keep our mind on the activities that we are doing. So we see that many factory operators, machine operators, people when they're driving, they make errors when they're under stress because they can't concentrate on the task at hand. There's also changes in appetite. So for example, some people when they're stressed, they lose appetite and it is shown by weight loss. Some people's appetite goes high in a way maybe to manage the stress. They take something that makes them feel happy for the moment. So they put on weight. There's also disturbances in the sleep pattern. So some people might just want to sleep a lot. They might sleep in the daytime, have more hours of sleep in the night, while others can't just get to sleep and they're losing a lot of sleep. So therefore, when a person is undergoing stress, as an immediate reaction, there's a very varied physiological and psychological reactions. And I'm sure all of us have gone through this because all of us would have experienced stress at one point in life or the other. Now, of course, short-term reactions of stress is okay because it kind of goes away after some time when the situations comes under control, or if you have good stress management strategies at your beck and call so that you can use it when stressful situations present itself. However, for some people who can't manage their stress properly, they don't have proper strategies to manage their stress, they don't know what to do. For example, when a huge financial situation arises, they have a huge loan to pay, or their child or their spouse or their parents or themselves have been diagnosed with a significant illness, or even the current pandemic situation. It's a long-term impact on changed lifestyle. So when these kind of upheavals come, if a person doesn't know strategies to manage their stress levels, there are long-term consequences too. Now that is a problem here. Like for example, existing physical illnesses can get worse. For example, if you have a dermatological condition like a skin disorder, like if you have acne, or if you have psoriasis, where there are like scabs formed on the scalp or on the skin, or if you have had some kind of a heart disease, but it's under control, you're under control, but then some stressful situation comes in your life, like say a conflict with your boss in your department which can't be resolved, you might see that symptoms of your previous physical illness comes up again. So on top of the already existing stressful situation, your physical illness can also flare up. So a lot of people say, my acne has come up again, my pimples are there, or, I'm like feeling very, very uncomfortable. My blood pressure has gone up, but it was under control a few months ago. So our body starts reacting to the mental strain that we are undergoing. Research have also shown that stress can lead to illnesses. We know now that if an individual can't manage their stress properly, it's associated with increases in blood pressure, stress management difficulties, is associated with heart disease, certainly with skin disorders, and in certain types of cancers, etc. So what we now know that is illnesses that were initially thought to be very physical, like blood pressure, heart disease, skin disorders, cancers, now have shown to have a psychological component also. Now that doesn't mean that the moment you get high blood pressure or a heart disease or skin disorder, you say, oh, it's a mental illness. That's not what it means. These are still very purely physical illnesses, but it can get triggered. The factors can be contributed in a psychological sense, where you might get a physical disease also. So it's really, really, really important that we learn how to manage stress so that we can live a calm life. So what I want to now talk to you is the kind of the sources of stress, because what are the actually stressful things that we can encounter, because there's a whole range of life events that we will experience in our life. Are all of these events stressful? What are the events that most people find stressful? So let's look at all of those. Apparently, research have indicated that one of the most difficult and one of the most stressful life situation is a loss of a loved one through death. Now, this may seem very obvious to you, isn't it? Because we know that if when somebody passes away because of death, that person will never come back to us and we will miss that person forever. But the key word is loved one. So for example, if you were in a relationship with somebody, or you had a friend who was actually not sincere to you and you knew that, and you didn't particularly love that person, though you had a relationship with that person, and if that person passes away, it won't be as stressful. Sometimes it can be even a sense of relief for some people, that it's finished. So here the key word is a loved one. So if you really loved your mother, really loved her, and then she passes away, the impact would be much more than if you didn't have such a loving relationship with your mother. Another source of great stress is divorce and marital separation. Now you might wonder, how could it be so stressful world over? Because you would want to divorce or separate from somebody who is not good to you or whom you are not finding compatible with. It should be, in a way, a source of relief. It is a source of relief. I mean, if you are in an unhappy marital relationship or an intimate partnership where the person is not fulfilling you, certainly you need to move on. However, that whole process of breakup, particularly when you two got together because of mutual dreams and expectations, and those dreams and expectations have come crashing down, that ending of that entire fantasy and that hope is what causes stress, not necessarily moving away from that particular person. So therefore, loss of a loved one, either through death and divorce, is one of the most stressful things a human being goes through. Now the job, a nature of a job can also be very stressful. Now, because we do know that the best hours of a weekday, and for some people in the weekend as well, we spend in our job, isn't it? At least 8 hours. So the best parts of a day, the morning hours, we are working, and some of us work in the afternoon, evening and night too. So the job is a huge part of our life, and if our job isn't fulfilling, if there are qualities in the job that is not fulfilling, it can be a great stress, great source of stress. So let us look at what those are so that you can identify that in you if these are applicable to you. First is work overload. So for example, if you have to get to work really early and then work throughout the day, and then you come back home with a whole host of files or a laptop and a project, and you need to work till late, not all in all, but if that's a regular source for you, then your job may be stressful. Now for some people, when they are undergoing family stress or any other kind of stress, they tend to overload themselves with work as a way of distracting themselves of the real problem that is stressful for them. So we see people who are having marital issues, for example, working long hours day in and day out in a way to distract themselves from the issue at hand. Distraction itself is not a bad thing, but if you distract yourself in this manner for a long period of time, you're not addressing the problem at hand, and unconsciously your mind knows there is an unresolved problem, and that itself can be stressful. Supervisors, leaders, heads of departments have to be very aware not to overload their employees with work, because that can lead to stress. Supervision of others. You might know that when we initially started our career, life was really fun, isn't it? I mean, we had friends, we used to go out for a coffee break, we used to meet up in the evenings, meet our friends on Friday, Saturday. We smiled more, we laughed more. But as we kept on getting our promotions, the amount of smiling and laughing had reduced. But we have always wanted promotions. We look forward to promotions. We want it. We want to be in positions of power. But the joy of life reduced. One of the reasons is because we have to supervise others. We are responsible for others, isn't it? Like, for example, we know in more responsible corporates and responsible governments, if a top-level person finds out that somebody beneath him or her had done a huge error, we find that responsible leaders also resign. But it wasn't actually the leader who did the mistake, it was somebody way down below, but under him. So what that means is that when we have to supervise others, we take over the responsibility of the work they do and the errors they do, and we are held responsible for it. And that's very stressful. That is why in certain countries, people actually forego promotions, because they don't want to be in so much of responsibility. I know a friend of mine in Australia, he was saying, well, at a particular level, he and his wife decided they're going to say no to further promotions because they don't want to take over that extra responsibility and be stressed, and not having the time and the energy to enjoy other things in life. Then more than 24 hours of work. Now, this is really applicable to people in the health field, like nursing officers, medical officers, then the forces, the tri-forces, who, especially in time of a warfare, they are, constantly working, and that constant work can be extremely stressful for their lives. That's why people who are in these kinds of jobs need to take constant breaks, otherwise they can make blunders in their job. Even shift workers, that is the shift, sometimes you do 2 or 3 shifts in one go. So you might do 12 hours of work or 18 hours of work because you need to finalize a production plan, but that can have a huge impact on the mind of the person because you're constantly working, there's no respite. Minority status of the job. If you are if you are ethnically, racially, in a religion, or because of your gender or your marital status, if you are in a minority, even though the other people in your team doesn't look at you as a minority, but because you know you're in a minority, it can be stressful. So we find people say having one woman in a team of men, or if you have like a person of a minority race where the majority is of the majority race, even though the majority group is not cornering and discriminating, the person, the minority status does feel stressed, because why? There is not many people that they can associate themselves with who are similar. So that's a source of stress. That is why in certain organizations they now say you need to have this number of women, you need to have this percentage of people representing the various racial groups in a country, so that there is more balance. Then of course harassment at work, isn't it? Now we know that maybe Keels also have it, John Keels Holdings also have it, but I was just going through some UN agencies, and what they do is that every time a person joins the United Nations, they have to go through some e-learning courses where they learn a lot about what harassment is, what abuse of authority is, what sexual harassment is, and they need to complete these e-learning courses and do an assessment before being considered for recruitment to the United Nations. So what it shows is that harassment at work is a huge issue. It could be simply abuse of authority by a boss, where they bypass people for increments or for promotions, where somebody who's really competent is not given a project because of whatever reason, where people in a department go out for lunches and dinners, keeping somebody else behind, ignoring people, favoring others. Then sexual harassment, making unnecessary sexual jokes in office, making gender-based comments about somebody, putting various kinds of like nude or pornographic material on the laptop while other people can also see it at the office. That kind of sexual harassment can have a huge detrimental impact on other people and on yourself if you are subjected to it. So companies, large corporate bodies now have policies on overcoming harassment, sexual harassment and abuse of authority, just because it can be very stressful for the employees. Then of course we do know that disasters are highly stressful. We do know that the pandemic situation that we are undergoing now is a disaster. It's where for several months we are either homebound or our life is hugely restricted with other multiple ramifications. And the longer one stays at home and in this kind of condition, it can be stressful, but not stressful for everybody, but for majority, I suppose. Then other disasters like floods, landslides, tsunamis, man-made disasters like war, rape, torture, witnessing murder, all of these things can be highly stressful. And we do know that having lived in Sri Lanka for many years, all of us have been exposed to multiple disasters other than the current pandemic. We've heard of floods, droughts, landslides. Even if we haven't experienced it directly, we've seen it on TV, we've seen our own people being affected by it, and somehow we feel powerless to prevent these things. And then of course we have had 30 years of a man-made conflict and been constantly exposed to the potential of a bomb blast, can all have a scar on our mind and give rise to stress. And of course, the small long-term problems like small traumas. So for example, say we didn't have the pandemic, and of course we don't have the conflict going on, which is a great thing. However, the little things in life, like the public transport system that doesn't work properly, the electricity cuts that happen out of the blues and constantly, the water cuts, like my mother lives in a particular area in the Colombo area where every day for like so many numbers of years, in the afternoon, there's a 3-hour water cut. I don't know why that is happening, but there's a water cut. So every day she has to put water into her buckets because she doesn't have an overhead tank to tide through from 1 p.m. to 4 p.m. So these are like small stresses. And when these small stresses like non-functional public transport system, leaky roads, then tarred roads that are constantly breaking up, then pickets and riots, those are little things, but they all add up and can break the proverbial camel's back, the last straw on the camel's back. So that is why countries such as in Scandinavia, where it's very cold, 6 months of the year they hardly see the sun, and then 6 months of the year they only see the sun. There's no night as such. But still, people living in those countries have a higher happiness index than country like Sri Lanka. So I think there are about 165 countries in the world, and there is this, every few years there is a survey done on the World Happiness Index, and Sri Lanka comes as 134 or 135 in the last survey. That's really low. Of course, we've had multiple disasters, but we also have rather non-functional public systems, isn't it? Whilst the number one countries are countries like New Zealand, most of the Scandinavian countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, they all come as number one. And one of the reasons is that they have very good social service policies. Their remuneration for elderly is very good. The facilities for childcare is really good. The public health system is excellent. The public transport system is excellent. Fairness, justice, education is excellent. So all of those structures that a government and a social system has provided has relieved the stress for people, which is not found in certain parts of our country. So these are the kind of sources of stress that people undergo. Now, of course, I must say this extremely important qualification, which is that just because an individual goes through these various sources of stress that I have mentioned to you, doesn't mean that they would be stressed, isn't it? Now, for example, we do know people in our lives who have gone through multiple difficulties in life. They may have lost their father when they were 5 years of age, and then they had to go and live with their grandparents and their mother, and then at 12 years of age, the mother has got a cancer and passed away. So this young person at 12 years of age had to cook for the grandparents, then go to school, then study under a kerosene lamp, no money for tuition or extra classes, but they battered on. They got through university, and there they may have experienced ragging and torture, still completed a degree, and now doing wonders. We hear stories like that. They're not uncommon. Then we hear stories of very beautiful people coming from very affluent families, born to wealth, and then they don't like themselves. They contemplate taking their life, they cut themselves, they want to harm themselves. And then you wonder, how is it that certain people who are born into extreme difficult conditions, like the first example I gave you, and those who are born into as the silver spoon or the golden spoon on their mouth, but they don't like themselves, they're so stressed that they want to harm themselves. What is the difference? The difference is the way we perceive stress, and that's a really important point, particularly because this point informs us that we can manage our lives, we can manage our stress, and we can overcome any stress we are feeling. So what does it actually mean? It means that we might lose somebody to death. We might have a divorce or a marital separation. We may be in a very difficult job with a difficult boss, or we may be overloaded with work because our department is working under capacity. Or we might be in a country where policies and systems need great improvement. However, if the way we look at our life and the situations we find ourselves can be changed, because it can be changed, you would not be feeling so stressed. So what this absolutely important point tells us is that your mental health, your ability to manage your stress lies in your hands. And you can utilize the strategies that I'll be talking to you later on in this webinar to do just that. So it is really in your hand, because some people say, you know, I was born into a difficult family. I went to this school where people bullied me. You know, my sister got leukemia when she was this age and I was ignored. Fine. All of those difficult life events has an impact on us. That is for sure. However, we could overcome those impacts and change our perspective on life, reduce the stress, and have a much more fulfilling life. So that's the positive. So have a look at the kinds of stress management strategies. Okay, so how do we actually manage stress? Now, so what we discussed is what stress is, the short-term responses to stress. Then we looked at long-term responses to stress. Then we looked at events that are largely stressful to most people in the world. Then very importantly, we spoke about individual variations in managing stress, which leads us to how do we manage stress? How do we actually manage it? There are strategies to manage it. Now, some people manage their stress by abusing substances like alcohol or tobacco or drugs or overeating or oversleeping or gaming or extreme online activity. That's their way of managing stress. But we do know that all of those strategies are not healthy. You need to adopt healthier strategies if you really want to manage your stress. If you're not, if you adopt these unhealthy strategies like hitting the bottle, smoking, using drugs, overeating, excessive sleeping, then retail therapy to the maximum, those kind of things will not really reduce your stress in the long term, and instead might even give you another set of problems. So therefore, rather than going down that path, that path of self-destruction in the guise of stress management, let us look at healthy ways of managing stress. First is change the stressful situation. Now that is, it's understood, isn't it? I mean, obviously you want to change the stressful situation. It seems like not a strategy, but it is a strategy, because you see, sometimes we find, I'll give an example. Sometimes we find ourselves, particularly in intimate relationships, but it could also be in platonic friendships, where we are with somebody who is very destructive to us. An example would be gender-based violence or violence against women. So you might be a woman who is in a relationship with a man, because usually gender-based violence, the recipient of violence is a woman. That's why I'm giving this example, but it could be the other way around in rare occasions. Is that some women will find themselves in very abusive, violent relationships with a man, but they don't want to leave the person, and they give X number of examples like, oh, he hits me, but he doesn't take alcohol. He hits me, he doesn't go with other women. He hits me, but I know he loves me. He hits me, but my children need a father. Or he emotionally puts me down in front of other people, but he doesn't hit me. He doesn't let me have any money in my hands, but he doesn't hit me. So all these justifications to be in a partnership, which is actually very stressful and traumatic, is given by certain people. I've had, when I'm working as a clinical psychologist, we come into contact with women who are beaten up by their partners, and they come to us for therapy. And on many occasions, more than we find being more than possible, we find women who come to us with bruises on their face and their body, blue by hitting. And when we talk about safety plans and moving away from the partnership and leaving the partner, even when the woman's family is ever willing to take her back, because some families are not willing, but these women's families say, come to us, we look after you, bring the children, leave that man. These women do not want to leave for whatever reason. So if you find yourself in a situation like that with a partner, leave. Change the stressful situation. You do not have to work on your mind to tolerate it. You need to leave that situation. It's the same for friendships too. Sometimes you have good friends from school times or university times, but as we grew older, we realize this person is not sincere to us. They do not mean well to us. They may have been sincere many years ago, but not anymore. They're insincere. But we still keep on meeting up with that person, the toxic person, because of past times. Don't do that. Leave the stressful situation. Leave that relationship. It may be difficult initially, but you can do it. So that is the first strategy of managing stress. Second is having social contacts. I cannot emphasize the importance of friendships in managing stress. There are people who say, I don't have friends. People out there are nasty and insincere and not genuine. So I prefer to be by myself. There are a lot of people who are insincere and not genuine in our lives. Some of them had been sincere to us before, but now they're not. That's where the world is. But just because there's a bunch of insincere people doesn't mean that there are sincere people too. In times of stress and crisis, the biggest source of stress relief is a good friend. Some people say, have a pet. Yes, pets are very, very good at stress relieving, but they can't talk back to you. They can't advise you. They can't give mutually satisfying one-to-one care and love the way a human can give. They also can't provide you with resources like a human could do. So really forming good friendships, long-term, sincere ones, are very important to manage stress. Now, some people, I look at their Facebook statuses and, they have 4,000 friends, 5,000 friends, another number, thousands of followers. But when you speak to them, very few have good relationships. So it's all great to have Facebook friends, and some of them can become your good friends later on. But here we're not talking about the number of friends. We're talking about quality. One example to really assess is if you find yourself wanting, say, 10,000 rupees just now, do you have a person whom you can call and they will give you that money? If you need to take some time off from home and you just have 2 days of break, do you have a friend whom you can call and go and stay at that place for 2 days and that person will look after you? Do you have people like that in your life? If you don't have such people, why is it? One of the biggest reasons is us. For us to attract good people into our lives and to keep them, we have to be a person with good human qualities. Are we sincere? Are we genuine? Are we giving our time and energy to other people when they have problems? Or are we self-centered? Are we selfish? Only concerned about ourselves? So one of the indicators when we do not have good friends is that we haven't invested in cultivating friendships, because we may have been self-centered. So therefore, if you want to manage stress in the future, invest in relationships by being a sincere friend to others, and sincere people will choose you in return. The third strategy is lessening screen time. We are in the habit of immediately browsing Facebook or Instagram or YouTube when we are stressed. And hours go by just going through that thing. Sometimes YouTube or Facebook will give us very valuable tips on managing the stressful situation you're in, guaranteed. I have done that. I've learned a lot from those sources. However, mindlessly going through screen for hours and hours has a stressful effect, because why? Your mind becomes very restless knowing that a great deal of precious time is lost just scrolling through. So therefore, please block out. Like for example, I have put my Facebook setting each day for 45 minutes. That's like how I'm going to do it. So that you have like you cut off the amount of time that you will use per day. You can put it into like a timer, and then that's it for the day. Exercise, the fourth stress management strategy. Doing exercise releases certain chemicals called endorphins in our brain, which are actually called happy chemicals, which makes you feel happier. You've noticed that when you're under some restlessness, under some strain, you're emotionally very, very fragile, your mood is not good, you're stressed, if you just go out for a walk, even without the intention of exercise, when you come back, you feel better. The reason is that our brain produces certain chemicals which actually uplifts us. So having a constant, continuous exercise regime for the day of say 5 days a week of half an hour duration where you exercise sufficiently to break into a sweat, not just a, just a stroll, but where you're actually breaking into a sweat, that will help you manage your stress. Spending time in nature is an invaluable tool of stress management. Invaluable. That's why very large organizations, I haven't had the pleasure of visiting your organization physically, though I have gone to your supermarkets, and I find I'm a great fan of Kia supermarkets. I always find one of those even though other supermarkets are there, because I find the whole ambience and the environment of Kia supermarkets very soothing. The staff is really friendly, and that green color outside and the fact that you're using environment friendly material really resonates with me, as opposed to other chains of supermarkets. I'm sure they also have their positives, but Kiehl's is really my thing. I've been to other organizations in our country who have similar environmental policies, like say MAS and Brandix, where their factories are very green. You look around, there are trees, real ones, not the fake ones, and you feel empowered. At home, if you're living in a high-rise building or an apartment, or you have very few patches of land in your house, have some potted plants, real ones, not the plastic variety. Nowadays you can buy these orchid plants. It's not expensive, and orchids can last for two months with the flowers also. So seeing greenery to the eyes can be extremely soothing. It's amazing how some people just want to cut off all their trees and put some concrete blocks on their pathway. That is not helpful. So having nature in your office space, having a little actual potted plant, having them at your home, having windows in your house open to see the greenery and the sky really helps reduce stress. That's why many people go on hikes, on nature trails. Nature holiday resorts are very expensive. Why? It's very stress relieving. Humor. Humor is an excellent strategy of managing stress, and I'm sure you will agree with me that Sri Lankans are the greatest at humor. In fact, one of my friends today just sent me a WhatsApp, one of those memes, which said, somebody has said, then, sometimes when somebody dies, they say, "Obara nivan suwa athweva, api langa nevath ipadeva." So, and this meme says, ඇත්තටම කියන්නේ මොකක්ද අවශ්‍ය? නැවත ඉපදෙන්නද නිවන් සුව ලබා ගන්න. I mean, those are just kind of really very culturally appropriate jokes, isn't it? So having a perspective of funness and funniness in life is really important. I remember something that happened when I was young. My father passed away when I was about 23 years of age. My brother was about 18. He passed away about 10 days before my master's final examinations, and I was living overseas. I was studying overseas, so I had to come back to the funeral. I was the eldest child of the family, and now my father had passed away suddenly, and my brother was 18. He was doing his A-level exams in a few weeks' time. And so there's a lot of things in my mind as a young person, and my mother was not working, so there were these other situations too, brewing at home financially. And then I was standing near my father's coffin, and my brother was standing near, when this Buddhist monk came to pay his respects to my father. A few years before that, prior to that, we had lived in Italy. My father was the ambassador at that time, Sri Lankan ambassador in Italy. So this particular monk had come and visited us on his way somewhere, and he had gone, according to my brother, jogging with my brother on the streets of Rome. So when this monk came to my father's funeral, I asked, my brother smiled at him and I asked, "Who is he?" And he said, "Aki, can you remember he came to Rome and I went jogging with him?" And I just got this image to my mind of my brother jogging with the monk and the Muhammados robes all flying over and they're all juggling. It was funny. And I started laughing and I couldn't control my laughter and my brother started laughing and I sensed at that moment that that huge build-up of tension that was in my mind really dissipated. So though the situation that I was in was very stressful to me as a young person, so what I'm trying to say is that doesn't mean that you go to each and every funeral and funeral house and start laughing. But no, what I'm saying is make it a part of your habit to look at the funniest side of things. And you can start it off by maybe having, appreciating these jokes, those, those memes or watching humorous movies. I mean, if you look at some of our teledramas that we have on, they're all like doom and gloom and violence and hitting and broken love affairs. There's nothing funny in it, isn't it? So you need to actively look around for some funny stories, watching funny movies, being with funny people. There are people who are, they're so hilarious, they're so light. Hang around with them so that you become a lighter person. A seventh strategy of managing stress is finding a larger meaning in life versus wanting to be happy. Now, this is a really, really deep concept and it's a very important concept, I was reading a happiness study, and in this happiness study, they had interviewed many people and they had found 3 strategies that really gives happiness to a person. One was lessening screen time. Second was this finding a larger meaning in life. And I want to talk to you about that. We do things to make ourselves happy, isn't it? I mean, we might meet up with a friend, or we might watch a movie, we might eat something that we really like, or have a relaxed day at home, because they make us happy. Now, finding a larger meaning in life doesn't really come to that category. It's a bigger concept. Now, let me give you an example. There's this young doctor whom I met who's also an academic staff member from a university in Colombo, in Sri Lanka. He is a medical doctor who's also a teacher and academic. He was on his Facebook profile. I saw certain entries that he had put. He was planting trees in his spare time, collecting plants and planting it in jointly with one of the forces, with a group of his colleagues. And also in his spare time, he was cleaning up the beaches of Sri Lanka. So he put these photographs. So I asked him, like, that's really interesting. Like, what makes you want to do these things? He said, you know what, we need to have more trees in our country and somebody has to do it. So in my weekend time, I collect money from friends and well-wishers. We buy plants and together with the army, I believe, they are actually growing this and it's free of charge. Nobody really knows that he's doing this, but he's doing this to bring meaning to his life. Now, cleaning the beaches is much more difficult. If you know how it is, it's so hot, the sand is getting heated up, the salty water is playing against you, and you are collecting garbage, plastic that has been accumulating over years. He showed me photographs of plastic that has Thai and Indonesian writings on it, which means plastic that has been thrown away from Thailand and Indonesia is coming to our beaches and polluting and killing the sea life, ocean life. So what this group of young men are doing is cleaning our beaches. Nobody's paying them for it. It is their Sunday afternoon. They could have done some fun things, but no, they're doing things which brings larger meaning in life. Do you have something like that in your life? Or is it that your life is looking after your family, earning for your family, meeting friends on Friday night, Saturday night, coming to work, buying that new iPhone or whatever phone, and that's it? If your life is like that, your life would be quite meaningless. And when a life is meaningless, it's very difficult to manage stressful situation as it arises in your life. You need to find a meaning. So is it about doing some charity? Is it about joining a charitable organization that does charity? Are you good at dancing? Would you like to give some dancing lessons to poor youth? Are you really good at English? Would you like to run a book club for children who don't know English? So what more can you do with yourself, giving yourself to others? That is a stress relieving strategy. And finally, my last and the most important of our strategies is living in the present moment, mindfulness. So I'm going to talk to you about that now. So mindfulness is my last and the most important of stress management strategies. Now, what does living in the present moment really mean? You might think, hey, I'm in the present moment. I'm very much in the present moment. But are you really? If I were to ask you now, I've been speaking to you for about, say, 45 minutes, 50 to 45 minutes. And if I ask you, how much of a percentage of the time you spent with me were you actually tuned into me percentage-wise? 0 is you were not tuned into me. 100 is that your mind did not go out anywhere. I doubt you were either at 0 or 100. Some people say, oh, I was at 70, I was at 80, but that's quite unlikely unless you have trained your mind. Usually, a person's ability to be in the present is only 40% of the time, which means 60% they've lost the plot at the moment. So what does living in the present moment involve, and what does it give us? Living in the present moment means being fully aware of what is happening in your life right now, what you're doing right now, being fully aware of what the thoughts are in your mind and the feelings are in your mind. So for example, while I'm sitting with you here talking to you, I can only see a black screen on my laptop. I'm sensing the cooling of the air conditioning hitting the right side of my body. I'm aware that I'm a little tired because I've been working long hours. Right now a thought came to my mind that after I finish this at 4:30, I need to go to Talaheri to pick up something. Then another thought came to my mind that I need to visit an elderly, aging, sick aunt of mine. So those are the things that are currently in my mind and body, and I'm aware of it. Now, many human beings go beyond being aware of what is in their mind and body at a given moment. Instead, what do? They proliferate. If you can see this PowerPoint slide that is on, many people elaborate beyond what is happening at the present moment. For example, say you are listening to this talk, or you just tuned in at the beginning at 4 o'clock, at 3 o'clock, and you were listening and I came online and you have never seen me before and you saw my face and I started talking. Then as you kept looking at my face, you remembered a person in your Montessori class called Anusha, who may have looked like me. But I'm not Anusha, I was not in the Montessori class. But seeing me triggered the image of Anusha in your Montessori class. Now, if you were in a person who is living in the present moment, after the image of Anusha came into your mind, you will not pursue thinking about Anusha. You will come back to what I'm talking in this webinar. However, as a person who has not trained their mind to be in the present moment, what do? Once the thought of Anusha popped up into your mind, you think, oh, I wonder what Anusha is doing right now. I lost touch with her after school, after kindergarten. I think she went to another school for grade 1. What is Anusha's surname? Was it Amrasingha, Amarasena, or Amrasurya? Guess what? I'll go on Facebook and I'll check her out. And now you have left the webinar, gone to your mobile phone and on Facebook trying to find this Anusha Amrasena person. Now, isn't that what life usually entails for us? It's very difficult for us to keep our mind in the present. We just flit off to various dimensions all in our mind. When you walk on the road, we are not aware of the walking process. Instead, we are thinking of dozens of other things and we might even fall onto a pothole. Usually, the untrained human mind lives in 3 places: the past, the future, and the fantasy. And they think it's fun. Thinking about something that happened 15 years ago, of how so-and-so scolded me, and how I should have scolded that person. And where is that person now? And if I meet that person on a future date at a wedding in 2 months' time, this is how I'm going to talk to him. Not knowing whether you can even go for that wedding in 2 months' time, or whether that wedding will be held in the first place. The third place is fantasy. You may have always wanted to go for the Miss World contest or the Miss Universe contest. Maybe you wanted to be the marketeer of the year at Sri Lanka. Maybe you want to get the Nobel Prize for the scientific discovery. But you know you cannot quite get there in this birth. But you can fantasize about it, isn't it? Thinking and fantasizing about something that you know you can't attain. That's where the mind goes to when it's untrained. The past, the future, and the fantasy. In fact, either our mind goes there or we push our minds there. You know, sometimes when we go in the train or in the bus or in the plane, out of sheer boredom, people push their mind to some past event or to a future possibility or to a fantasy just to entertain themselves. Now you might wonder, why is it so bad not to do this? Why does she say it's untrained mind? The reason is, if you were to reflect on your own life, when your mind goes to past, the future, and or the fantasy, what happens is that initially you might get a kick, like a high. However, what happens is that after that initial high goes, your mind crashes. You can feel depressed, distressed, low mood, and you can feel restless. Why? Because the mind knows that what you were contemplating, what you were thinking, is not real. And that itself can be stressful. So therefore, what does being in the present moment involve? It involves keeping this is a very, very important line. Please keep your attention. What present moment, living in the present moment involves is keeping your mind in the activity that you're doing. Let me give you an analogy or a simile. Say you have a bookcase at home. On the bookcase, you're going to keep your books, right? And nicely the books are placed, because fortunately the bookcase has very strong racks, so the books won't fall off. Similarly, a person who is training their mind to be in the present moment, what do? They keep their mind on the activity they are doing. So the books in the bookshelf is the keeping the mind. The rack is the activity that they're doing. So if, for example, tonight, when you go home, you want to make a carrot soup and you're cutting the carrots or the onions, you keep your mind on the carrot. And as you cut the carrot, your mind might wander here and there. It might wander to the teledrama you intend to watch at 9 p.m. What would the current episode be? But the moment your mind wandered to the teledrama, because you can't stop that initial thought about the teledrama coming to your mind. But what you can stop is not thinking further about it. Without thinking further, you bring your mind back to cutting the carrot, because that's all there is for you to do now. There's no teledrama now. Then again, when you're cutting the carrot, you remember that you need to help your child with her online class homework. And then you start scolding the teacher or the school or the COVID or the government because of this. Now those are all excessive elaborations. It's nothing to do with your current activity, which is cutting the carrot. So what you do, if you're going to train your mind to be in the present moment, you bring your mind back to cutting the carrot. So like that, if your mind wandered 728 times, each 728 times you bring your mind back to carrot. That's how you train your mind. And every time you bring your mind back to the present moment, your mind becomes very strong. It's like you're putting cement around a very weak pillar. You're putting some more cement, you're going to strengthen it. Your mind becomes very strong and very resilient. And when such a mind is with you, when a stressful external situation comes in the form of a disaster, a pandemic, a death of a loved one, loss of a job, or a declined promotion or a financial difficulty or a significant illness, your mind won't topple. Because you have strengthened it at this point. Remember, it's very difficult to strengthen your mind to face stressors when the stress situation has occurred. You need to do that work beforehand when the time is good, and time is good now. It's like in a garden, if a plant hasn't put out sufficient roots and made itself into a big, strong tree, it can't sustain a cyclone. When a cyclone is a few meters away, they can't suddenly start putting the roots. It will die off when the cyclone comes. So you need to strengthen your mind now. When the future events come, you will not. So let me give you a little diagram to show this. So this little diagram was given by a teacher to the students and asked to draw the shortest direction to the milk. And the very clever student didn't go into the puzzle as was expected, but instead drew a short line there. The teacher gave her a correct mark as well as a red mark. What this really shows is, as this caption says, is that usually life is really simple. We complicate it by imagining a non-existent problem. We complicate it by imagining a non-existent problem by excessive thinking, isn't it? If you look back in your life, how many times we have complicated our life and created umpteen number of stress in our life by overthinking. Just overthinking about things that will never happen. I remember when I was, when we were at university, we used to go on a lot of trips, during holidays and also not during holidays. And at the time, the 1990s, when I was at university, there was no mobile phones, there were no emails, there were only land phones. And if I wanted to call home, I had to find myself a phone call booth, and most of them were vandalized anyway, so it was really difficult. But we lived our life, it was a very peaceful life. So once I remember, I had to call home, either to my mother or father or somebody, to give an update of how my trip was going. And I hadn't called them for a few days. So I was getting really anxious, and all the stories was like brewing up in my mind. Like, oh, when I answer the phone, so and so will ask me, where have you been? Why haven't you called? Why are you spending so much of money on your trip? Come back home immediately. Why aren't you studying? You're always tripping, things like that. I fortified myself for this, hearing this long story, and I could see my anxiety and my anger and my restlessness as a reaction to my own thoughts building up. So anyway, I got myself into a payphone booth and I called, and the first thing the person whom I called to said was, "Hi, how's it going there? I have a good time. Do you have enough money with you?" And then I was like, all those days of overthinking about what somebody else might tell you and getting myself all worked up, not enjoying those few days of my trip, what for? So during that time in my life, I did know this strategy, so I hadn't practiced it. But now what we do know is that every time you train your mind to be in the present moment with the activity that you're doing, you cut off all these extra thoughts and your mind becomes very rested, so rested that you become very peaceful, you become very content, you see the life for what it is, and you have the capacity to make decisions wisely rather than taking ad hoc, restless decisions. So what I want to do now is I've completed the main crux of my talk, and I want to kind of give you a summary before we take questions. So today what we discussed was about stress, the whole, the controversy about the term stress. I also gave you a definition of what stress is. I gave you indicators of short-term indicators, psychological and physical, of stress. Then I spoke to you about long-term impact of stress, which is leading to physical diseases. Then we discussed about the main sources of stress. But then I also went on to say that though there are these main sources of stress, there are individual variations in the way we react to stress. So it's all in your hand. The stronger your mind, the less stressful, so-called stressful events will impact you. Then I went on to talking about various stress management strategies. I spoke about changing the stressful situation, forming good friendships, lessening screen time, exercise, living with nature, having a meaningful life, and finally of mindfulness or living in the present moment. So that's all what we discuss now. So maybe for the next 20 minutes, we could take some questions. Is that okay?
Yes. So Doctor, I think it was a very insightful session, at least for me personally. I mean, I had to bring my mind back quite a few times back into the session while the session was in operation. We of course do have few questions that we've got from our audience members. So one of the questions, what do you do when a family member is dealing with stress negatively and you are in this lockdown situation? How do you not let it impact you?
So it's a family member who's going through stress, not this person.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. I think what I see, we must really be compassionate towards people during this time because it's not easy, isn't it? It's very, very, how to say, very unusual circumstances we find ourselves in. So I'm very compassionate towards everybody, and we need to be compassionate towards ourselves. And firstly, not to have huge expectations that we will do wonders managing stress. We won't do wonders, that others would do wonders, because this is unprecedented times. That's number one. Secondly, what I try to do when another person who I'm close to is undergoing stress is that I try not to get too hooked on to that person's stress. Because I always believe that things pass, everything passes, So, what we usually do is when somebody's going through stress, we kind of jump into that situation and try to solve the problem for the person. But if you do not have the capacity to do that because you yourself is vulnerable and fragile, don't do that. So if that person wants to talk to you about how they're feeling, listen to it at that time. Listen rather than offering solutions. Then try to see that there are solutions which you can offer the person, but don't get hooked onto it. Don't talk about it morning, day and night. Because your life will only be that person's problem. But what about your problem? Nobody talked to you about it. So only if that person wants to talk to you, talk. Otherwise, spend time with yourself, talk to that person about other things. Don't get hooked too greatly. That's the real thing that you need to do. Anything else, Hashi?
Yes. So there's another question. I think there is a certain audience that is joining with us who are also supervisors and managers of the organization. As a supervisor, how do you know if you are adding to the stress?
If your employees are not happy, if your employees look grumpy, they are not jovial at departmental meetings, they just don't talk. And when you go out on social meetings, they sit like as if they have been mummified and brought from some pyramid in Egypt. You can sense it, right? You can sense that people are uncomfortable. Of course, they may be uncomfortable not because of the supervisor, but there may be other issues in the department. But as a leader, we have a lot of responsibility to ensure that the people underneath us is happy. Of course, we can't cram happiness into somebody's mouth because ultimately it's a lot of work that we do ourselves. But as a leader, we can make the environment healthier by being a healthy model of mental health ourselves. And in that process, if you find that people don't talk at department meetings, there is no humor amongst the people are not relaxed, there's absenteeism, there's distrust, then there's something wrong there. If most people are like that, there's something wrong there. It doesn't mean that you're at fault, but there's something wrong. So you need to diagnose it, you see.
Okay, so just adding to that question, given the current scenario, how we are operating and how the teams are like very disjointed and operating from home, especially as a supervisor, how can you assess it as of now? I mean, because you might not have the one-to-one interaction and that physical interaction that you would normally have with your teams?
So how to kind of be a support for your people, is it?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, I would think just kind of checking up. See, the thing is, we also don't want to strain the supervisors, isn't it? I mean, he can't suddenly become a psychologist to everybody, you know. That's because that person also may be going through certain strain because they have to deliver, they have to meet the margins, you know. Plus, they may be having their own family issues, their own mental health issues. On top of that, they have this team to be kind to. So first of all, is do your best and a little bit more extra every day. Not a lot extra. So that you know you're good enough. You don't have to be perfect. Then what I usually do is if I know that somebody is particularly vulnerable, I would check on that person, not necessarily by calling. I'll just put a text message. How are things? How are you? How are you keeping? And if usually over time, if trust has been built between the two people, the recipient of my text message will be open to talking to me. But if the person texts and said, I'm fine, I will take it as it is, I'm fine. I won't hook on to it further. It will be too much for me also. So therefore, being a supportive leader doesn't start from the pandemic time. It should have started before, where you had made these good relationships, where people are willing to come to you because they know they can rely on you and your advice. You see? So keep an eye on your staff. You have to do that. That's what you're being paid for, and that's a kind thing to do. But don't go overboard just calling everybody, visiting their houses, and if they are not there, you go and knock on their door with the, you know, packets of, I don't know, biscuits, stuff like that. Don't. I know an organization where a manager did that, and the husbands thought this man has come some kind of ulterior intention because he was going with some rice packets to the people. So there was a huge problem. And we told him, don't go to that extent. People might have wrong ideas. So you need to have a balance.
All right, great. Also, we have another interesting question. If you're always in the present, not dwelling to the past, future and fantasy, how do you analyze situations, explore different options, and evaluate strategies to plan your next course of action?
Beautiful question. It's a really important one because people think that living in the present is like you're like a doormat sitting there, like a pudding. So like a pudding. So that is not what it is. So for example, today I thought, now say as a proponent of present moment awareness, you would think that I don't know what's happening to next moment. Now you can't live like that. So for example, today I decided I'll get up at this amount of time because I want to do my exercise. Then I have all these things I need to do, some e-learning courses. Then I need to come online at 2:45 because Rahis wanted me to do that. So, and I thought I'll wear this particular clothing because after this webinar I need to rush somewhere else. So I need to be dressed for that as well. So, of course I made a plan. It's not as if suddenly you, but the difference is that I don't dwell on that plan subsequently. What do most people do? They plan and they think, if I wear that clothing, will this happen? If I don't wear it, why will this happen? They go on extra. That's what you shouldn't do. So certainly you can have your budget meetings, you can have your marketing plan meetings, you could have your, you could design for your child's birthday party. But after you've done that plan, leave it. Rather than thinking and rehashing like the proverbial cow that is eating the grass over and over again. Don't do that. Once you thought about it, leave it. You might get a new thought to replace the old decision, replace it. But don't go on rehashing like the cow. That is the difference. So that's a good question.
I think the way that you're answering some of these questions are opening up a lot of minds, I'm sure, because we keep on getting a lot more questions. So just moving on to another question. How do you identify the need for external support to manage stress? And how do you direct a team member to seek external support without offending the person?
Oh, good. Yeah, that's the last slide. I forgot to talk about that. So now the strategies that I gave you is for your own self. You know, you do it yourself. Whether you are under stress now or not, you need to do this, please. Because we can't be epitome of stress management. When the stressful situation arises, we have to strengthen ourselves now. It's like in ancient Sri Lankan villages, apparently, before the village is coming, they have a huge pillar. if anybody is familiar with the Ratana Sutra, it's called Yatinda Kilo. It's a pillar. It says that this pillar doesn't sway from wherever the wind comes. It's a strong pillar. It's an indicator to the people that just beyond there's a village. So our mind has to be like that. Before the stressful situation comes, our mind has to be strong. That's how I gave you these strategies. However, these strategies may not be sufficient for you if you're undergoing a particularly difficult time and you can't manage it on your own. Then you need to go and get professional help. There is no harm to get professional help. It's a matter of strength to do that. So who are the people whom we can go for professional helps? There are clinical psychologists, people with a bachelor's degree in psychology honors, and at least a master's degree in clinical psychology, if not a PhD. Then there are counseling psychologists, again a bachelor's degree in psychology, at least a master's degree in counseling psychology, if not a PhD. Then there are psychiatrists who has an MBBS degree and an MD in psychiatry. There is unfortunately in the country a certain number of non-qualified people who do like to call themselves these professionals. So you need to be aware. Or government hospitals who have psychiatrists and clinical psychologists are probably vetted. It's totally vetted. You can go to government services. Most government hospitals have psychiatric units where you can get services for. Then private hospitals of renown look for registration and licensing before they employ these professionals in the private practice. If you really want to make sure before you ask somebody to, you can check with Sri Lanka Medical Council where they maintain a register so that you go to the proper person. So certainly, if you feel you just can't manage on your own, you need to get some professional help, do that. And as a supervisor, if you feel that somebody is having difficulty, people might not like it if you say that. They might think, people get cheese talk, you see, so be very careful. So maybe as a supervisor, you could first broach the subject by saying, I've seen there's a change in your behavior, you seem to be more pensive, you seem to be a bit irritable, I'm concerned about you. What can I do? Can I do to help you? Or do you like me to find out a professional for you to go with? Rather than saying immediately go and meet a psychologist, like that. That can be a bit harsh. Yeah. Anything else, Sashi?
Yes, actually there's a lot more, but I'm at least filtering it up to a certain extent. There's a very interesting question. How do we get rid of overthinking? And also another part to that, how to stop comparing yourself with others?
Yeah, so overthinking again is some people, not everybody is an overthinker. I am an overthinker. I was an overthinker much before. Now I'm not so much an overthinker. And the relief of not overthinking is immeasurable. And how I stopped overthinking or minimized overthinking is practicing present moment awareness. I've been practicing present moment awareness technique, which is a psychological strategy as well as a strategy coming from Buddhism, but has now been taken into modern psychology. I've been practicing it for 16 years. And how do you actually do it? I've told you, Sashi, you recorded the session. People who want to have it can really listen to it again. The practice of present moment awareness is the key strategy for reducing overthinking. You can use apps. Mobile phones have apps on mindfulness. You can download those. They have strategies too. Like for example, there are what you call mindfulness bells. So, you can put it at a random time when you're working and suddenly the bell goes off like a little chime. That reminds you to bring your mind back here if you're overthinking mode. So like that, you train your mind over weeks and months and years to be here like that. You're containing your mind like that. And one fine day you will realize your mind really doesn't want to wander anywhere. It's very happy here. And you will get to that point. So therefore, how to stop overthinking is the strategy of present moment awareness, which I've touched on. There's a lot of documents on that on YouTube and on the Google. If you do a search, there are apps. Please read more and you will be able to be a proficient at it. How to stop comparing yourself with others? Again, comparison is based on thinking. Comparing yourself with others is very detrimental to our self-confidence and self-compassion. Unfortunately, Sri Lankans have that a lot. It has been told to us by our parents. They compare us with all random sorts of children when we are young. And then in schools, they give us positions in class. So we are comparing each other since like grade 1. So now when you're older, we are comparing ourselves with every Tom, Dick and Harry that passes by as well. So it's like a habit. So it's a habit that one has to actively dissociate oneself with. The moment I start comparing myself with somebody, I don't allow my thoughts to go down that track. I stop it because it's so detrimental. And if still you can't stop it, then you can think of the positives that you have, not in comparison to the other person, but what do you bring to the table in this life, you know? It could be your beautiful hair, or the fact that people really think you're a great, confident person whom they can share their problems with. Think about what you have, rather than comparing yourself with another person. Compare yourself with yourself. So those are some of the strategies.
Great. Another question that I've got, which is something a bit contradictory to one of the messages that you shared. How do you actually lessen screen time when you now almost require to be on a screen to be engaging with the outside world in this current scenario? Because
that's not
one of the
easy.
recommendation, yes, you gave us to reduce the screen time, but I think there's a lot of people who's joining the webinar itself who's having this as a question, where now you are required to spend this time on screens.
Yeah, so that's a real problem. Like recently, I was working with the IT company, predominantly it's an IT company, and doing some counseling services, and they were saying, even being in the IT industry and used to have a lot of screen time anyway, being in IT, this is really unprecedented, and they just think, is this what life is? A screen? Because they're not seeing their team members. It's very tough. So lessening screen time is absolutely difficult in this day and age. So what I do is, of course, I'm not so much on screen as you would, but I suppose there's exponential growth anyway. I wouldn't sit in the same place for more than 1.5 hours. I do take a 15-minute break to do more really physical things, like, because we are working from home, usually it would be to, you know, kind of even clean the fridge, fold the laundry, put the laundry, go out and water my plants, even if it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, just to get that, you know, that physical feel to life, physical, because that's the only thing you have. Then, of course, because we're always working on screen, you might want to do a bit of Facebook and Instagram and YouTube, and that's another screen time. Initially, when I spoke about screen time, I meant only those social medias. But now you also need social medias to keep connected. So it is not easy to reduce screen time, but when you find yourself aimlessly scrolling, that is where you have to reduce. Otherwise, if it's actual concrete productive work you're doing, do it, because that's what is required at this time in our life.
All right. Also, there is another very interesting question I thought I should direct it to you. How to put personal boundaries between myself and work. I find myself working more since there is nothing else to do during work from home days. So, and you're very much limited in terms of your social interactions, like going out with friends. So if you are actually to put a boundary between yourself and the work that you do, what are some of the tips that you can share?
I would think you would need to decide how much work you need to do, you're going to do that day. Like, for example, I still have a physical diary, and though we may be doing more work, I write down for each day what I'm going to do. Like, for example, and I don't cram that diary. Like, for example, today I have my webinar with you all, then I have this afternoon appointment, then I had to do some e-learning courses. I wrote it. It could have been in my mind, but no, I write it. Then I tick it. And I had put another item to do, but I couldn't do that today, and I put it for Monday because my Friday is finished. And the weekend I'm not, because weekend Saturday morning I have another webinar to do on ragging, and that's it. So you need to really structure your week and your day and your weekend. Don't leave it open. Like, I'll think what I'll do. Okay. Don't do that. Say, okay, Friday by 5:30 I'm done. And even if it means I can't go and meet a friend, if you have a vehicle, you can even go for a drive. You know, just to have something out. Plan it. You need to plan your day. Don't leave it open, because then you'll be sitting in front working 24/7. And that work won't be of quality work. You're just sitting like a pudding in front of the screen. really not doing quality work. But if you have a structure, like Monday, these are my things I'm going to do, and that's it, and that's all what you're going to do. So you're structured. So that's how you might want to, yeah.
Okay. So maybe before we wrap up, maybe one more question that we've got from the audience. Could physical illnesses also be a source of stress? While the common consideration is that stress could also like worsen your physical illness. So.
Yes. Having a physical illness will obviously have a stressful effect on you, because it's the unknown, isn't it? It's the unknown, and you're afraid. Even sometimes when you get the flu also, now people get stressed now. If you get a sore throat also, you think you're having something else. If you have a little lump here, you're thinking something else, because there's like a lot of unqualified information going. So obviously, and you want the illness to go away soon so that you can come back to your pre-illness functioning. So of course, illness, having it can lead to stress, but it depends on the person. Some people, when they get a small pimple also, they think that a volcano has erupted. But other people, even if they have been diagnosed of a necessity to have a bypass surgery, they go coolly to the theatre. Again, see individual differences in the way they perceive the event. And why have they got these individual differences in the way they perceive the event? Because they had practiced the strategies I have talked about. You see, their mind has been resilient. So when a situation arises, they are strong like that pillar, while another person just falls flat.
All right, I think with that we come close to the end of this session. So thanks a lot, Professor Priyanjali D'Souza, for joining with us and being very open and upfront in terms of what you wanted to share with us, and also spending a lot more time with the team towards getting this organized. You were very sincere and very supportive in putting this together. So thanks a lot. And also to our viewers on the other side, a quick message before I wind up. There will be a special session of videos which will run over a course of 10 weeks, that is extended by Professor Priyanjali in terms of stress management, which will come as a video series in Sinhalese, where
subtitles.
Yes, with subtitles in Tamil as well. So please make sure that you watch that series of videos as well. To whoever who couldn't join the session, we will be sharing it with you all. It will be available in our stream channel for your viewing, and you will be able to connect up with Professor through those videos and learn more about the subject, and also help yourself in terms of protecting your mind. So with that, we wrap up this exciting session. Until we meet you with one of our exciting online sessions once again, have a pleasant evening and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Sashi and Rahis.
Thank you, Doc.